Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. You are listening to, you are witnessing, you are watching, you are sharing the experience of humanity in the headlines. I am your host, Atiba Buchanan, and I am joined by my main man, Mr. David Seaton. How are you, sir?
What's going on, man?
David Anthony. I just feel like adding a middle name today.
Atiba Karim.
There it is. DAS and AKB in the building. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. Hello, Facebook Live. We certainly appreciate you. Thank you to our IntellectualRadio.com listeners, individuals watching us on YouTube, whatever iHeartRadio, whatever venue you are using. We thank you for joining us, taking time out of your busy schedule, and we will definitely look to honor that today with tons of information, entertainment. We got you today. What an awesome show we have lined up. Am I right, Dave?
Absolutely. Quick shout out to both Nina and Linda on Facebook Live. All of you who are watching us on Facebook Live, feel free to comment throughout the show so that we can capture your questions and or your comments, because we do have two very exciting guests today and two exciting topics.
I was going to say, and two exciting topics. This, right. I think we really have our finger on the pulse of the things that need to be discussed today. Just to give you guys a preview, in just a minute, we'll be speaking with Ms. Gloria Brown Marshall. She is a law professor, obviously a lawyer, to help us make sense of the conversation about all of the indictments that we've seen this week.
There have been several.
You know what I learned most about the indictments this week? I didn't know that Robert Mueller was investigating Webster's dad.
Webster.
George Papadopoulos. That's the exact same name as Webster's father.
You went there.
I know.
He just told on himself to everybody who's listening on how old we are.
George Papadopoulos. That is Webster's dad's name.
That's the character's name.
Yes.
I did not remember that.
Yes, that's his father. Yeah.
No, now that you mention it, he did call the dad George and he called the mother ma'am.
Right.
Okay. So, but no, I didn't remember.
Right. So that was funny, but nonetheless, we will definitely have a nice, robust conversation about that. We're actually going to pose the question today, too. What happens if Mueller finds information that does lead to collusion and we just give it a collective, because that could happen. Wow. But we're going to get into that later into the show. And then later on, a lot of you were really excited on Facebook to see this, and we're definitely going to bring that conversation for you. We will be speaking with none other than Professor Jane Elliot, one of the foremost authorities on race relations in America. She has been doing this for longer than most of us have been alive. I think she taught her first class on this the day after Martin Luther King was assassinated.
Wow.
Yeah. So she is.
You've seen her on if you were. She's had a couple of videos on Facebook.
Absolutely.
And we were just talking about that before the show, where she has the one
brown-eyed, blue-eyed experience.
Right.
That's what it's called.
Right. And she has a class. She's in a classroom and she has a female Caucasian student break down and cry and leave the room.
Yes.
Really deep video. If you get a chance to see it, check it out.
She's going to be on today to talk about the role that education, our educational system in America, plays in continuing to perpetuate racism. It's going to be an amazing conversation. I cannot wait. I'm sure many of you are excited. So thanks for joining in to Humanity in the Headlines today. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will be joined by Gloria Brown Marshall. You're listening to Humanity in the Headlines. are back on Humanity in the Headlines. So, Dave, I've been kind of giddy all week. This all obviously, we heard the news last Friday that there were going to be indictments on this coming Monday and possible arrest.
Right.
So everybody was waiting with bated breath. That was leaked to CNN through whatever resources they had. Thank goodness for them. And then on Monday morning at about 7:04 Eastern.
Right.
No, 7:04 Central, 8:04 Eastern, Paul Manafort was on every television station in the country walking himself into the FBI.
Right.
You and I had, we had a little gentleman's bet going last week as to who was going to be, and I don't even remember the results of the bet, but everybody again was kind of expecting either Michael Flynn or Carter Page.
Right.
And it turns out that it's Paul Manafort being the main person to be indicted. And as I quipped earlier, they indicted, made a plea deal with Webster's dad,
right,
George Papadopoulos, which I had not heard that name since Webster,
right,
but I'd realized how many times I'd said it. And I think that was the thing that really caught most people off guard. So I think the main thing that it showed me was that Mueller was serious. This is a serious investigation, because we get so much unseriousness out of Washington. There are so many things that are just done for pomp and circumstance, that are just done out of obligation, just to, for appearances. This is not one of those moments, Dave.
It is not.
Yeah,
it is not.
This is getting serious, and I can only imagine what people in the inner circle of the Trump campaign must be thinking and have been thinking all week. But it brought a huge smile to my face Monday to see that this, because we've been looking at Mueller, and again, many in this country have seen Mueller as our savior, as someone that's going to finally be able to do something about this travesty of an administration that we've seen since February or January 20th, whenever it started. But nonetheless, we haven't had much by way of hope and by much of information, because he's held everything to the vest, close to the vest. So we understand now that that's been done as a matter of professionalism.
Joining us today to help us dissect this whole issue is attorney Gloria Brown Marshall. She is an assistant professor of constitutional law at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She's litigated civil rights and public law cases for the NAACP, Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Community Legal Services, and the Southern Poverty Law Center prior to her academic experience. After her academic experience. She is the author of The Constitution, Major Cases and Conflicts, founder of the Law and Policy Group Incorporated, and a noted playwright. Thank you for joining us today, Gloria.
Thank you.
So I just have to, let's just jump out there. Give us your initial impression of what's going on right now with Mueller and the indictments that came down this week.
Well, months ago, when Mueller was appointed as special counsel, and you look at the statute that allows him to have these very broad powers, he can look at almost anything that has any connection with the Russians' involvement in our politics. And so I was on a CNN program with Berman and Poppy, and I said afterwards, people keep focusing on Trump. They should focus on the people around Trump. And here's what we should take as our map for this, and that is Richard Nixon and what happened with Watergate. Because this is a clear roadmap for what we're dealing with right now. They did not get Nixon. And I'm sure as close as they get to Trump, he'll resign before he's taken down. It's all the people around them, these central figures, Trump and Nixon, who have this cult of personality that would put someone in a position to break the law just to appease these very powerful people. It's just amazing. And I say it's personality because you have people who are these minions in high-level places like Manafort, like Papadopoulos, and many, many others who are afraid to go to sleep at night. There's a lot of pacing going on in Washington, D.C.
Right.
Because Manafort, for him to believe that he could sign a document, and that's how they get people, perjury, That's how they got Clinton, perjury.
Right.
You know, sign a federal document saying that you told everyone what your relationships were with any foreign nation, and then to have so many relationships with foreign nations and money coming from those relationships. And so Manafort is just the tip of the iceberg. The other ones have probably already turned or have already given information. We just don't know who they are.
Right. Right, because no one saw George Papadopoulos coming, and as I'm watching this, and I'm looking at Jeff Sessions, who has now been contradicted by 3 different people. He's been contradicted by Carter Page, by George Papadopoulos, and by Paul Manafort, as evidenced by him being indicted, having told the Congress under oath on 3 separate occasions that he had no knowledge and he had no knowledge of any conversations with anyone in the campaign, having conversations with anyone from the Russian government. I'm struck, and I hate that I even have to go there, but and you know, being on CNN, oftentimes this is the juxtaposition we have to do. But if the Republicans were in power, or when the Republicans were in power, if Eric Holder had gone before Congress and under oath lied or had to recant 3 times consecutively, what would the Republican Party be saying about Attorney General Eric Holder?
Well, as a matter of fact, because the former Attorney General Gonzalez, who preceded him, was the one who got into this and created this Fast and Furious, campaign of trading guns for information, or trying to figure out where the guns were going and then follow them and lost track of them. And then they wanted and did hold Eric Holder in contempt when he gave them all the information that he had. And they still said, well, there's more information you have and you haven't given it. And because we don't know what it is, but we just know that you didn't give it.
Right.
So we're going to hold you in contempt, which is something historically is unprecedented. And so for them to do that to him during his time as Attorney General, and then in this case have, Jeff Beauregard Sessions actually say, oh, you're asking the questions too quickly. I can't follow them fast enough.
Right. That was with Kamala Harris. And when I remember seeing that live, it just struck me because I could just imagine what Attorney General Jeff Sessions would be saying if he were in court and he was firing off questions to someone on the stand and they said, I'm sorry, you need to give me a minute. You're asking those questions too quickly. I can just imagine how he would just turn that and color that as evidence of that person's guilt. The other thing that I thought about, and I'd love to get your opinion again as an attorney, this whole George Papadopoulos thing. When earlier this week, when they announced that they were indicting him and he's getting a plea deal or whatever, but ultimately the charge that that's being leveled against him is that he lied to the FBI. So the first thing that occurred to me is the only way, and this is why the Trump administration should be so nervous right now, the only way that they would know that George Papadopoulos lied is if they got testimony from someone else that contradicts what he said on the record. Isn't that right?
Yes, and that's why there's a lot of pacing going on in Washington, D.C. as we speak, because there are so many people who know the people who were in the circle, who are woven in and out. And Trump is a person who's already shown he will throw people under the bus, the train, the car.
Right.
He'll throw people under a bicycle if he has to. And, so for these people, knowing they don't have cover from Trump, knowing this, knowing that there are other people who have already spoken to the special counsel, knowing how broad the special counsel's power is under these circumstances, it's just a matter of time, because if nothing else, they'll get them on perjury. If nothing else. And of course, the conspiracy theories of whether or not they colluded with the Russians, that's something that's down the line. That, and my concern, and I'm going to say this here, and I've said it in private, I'm going to say it on the air now. Putin is somebody who has taken out his enemies. I wonder what he's doing from his standpoint. Does he care if he comes back and ends up at his doorstep? Or is he willing to take some people down to avoid this international embarrassment for the Russians? They've gotten in such a deep manner. And the last part, they're treating it like it is a mafia investigation. That's what's fascinating about this too.
Wow, thank you so much for that color and perspective. I'm sure that's something that I had not considered. I'm sure many of our listeners had not, but we thank you for bringing that to the light. This is Atiba. I'd like to ask you this because we have this gap in time where Papadopoulos was arrested in July, but he didn't enter into his plea deal until October. So my question is, what happened? There's been a lot of speculation about between July and October that he may have been wearing a wire. And here's the possibility that, well, here's the thing that I took away from that. I watch this stuff every day. I know who all the players are. I've never heard of George Papadopoulos ever. So my point is, if they were able to keep that arrest under wraps, in this age of leaking where everything gets leaked, but nobody knew about his arrest, then what do you think is the probability of him wearing a wire? And if so, how much more information do you think Mueller already has?
I think going back to why there was such a gap in time, one, they were trying to get this plea deal. Two, he probably was wearing a wire. Remember Linda, the friend of, in the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky's friend who met with her. That's why I said if you just look at the other cases, and you'll see that there is, so much that's similar to what happened with the Bill Clinton case, with the Richard Nixon case. It's just really amazing. And wearing a wire is something that, of course, if they did it in the Bill Clinton case for something where they're talking about he's having an affair and trying to catch him with perjury, and that's how they caught him. So, and the dress, the famous dress. So you know that there's going to be at least a wire worn in a case like this. And Papadopoulos, to get the plea deal he had to do something. He had to figure out how he could be useful to the prosecution.
Right. He had to do something, and he had to have something. He had to have something that they wanted.
Yes, he has to bring something to the table. I mean, unlike television, where they just say, everything happens within, an hour with commercials. These things are timely. They take time to go through and to meet with the attorneys and get all of these things in line. And so July until this point is really not that long a time period for what we're talking about, the high stakes type of prosecution we're working with.
I'd like to transition it a little bit and talk about, I've seen, as far as speculation is concerned, a couple things that have been out there. But a lot of people are concerned about Trump's ability to pardon people, to take the pressure off of them to cooperate with Mueller. And I came up with a piece that was put out by the Slate earlier this week. And it says Robert Mueller's brilliant strategy for outmaneuvering Trump's pardons. And I definitely want to speak to you as an attorney to see if this has merit. What the writer talks about is, I just highlighted some portions. It says, the bottom line, if Mueller starts a trial on all the potential charges, then Trump pardons Manafort, Mueller will not be able to hand off the case to state prosecutors. And the point in saying that by the writer was saying that there are a lot of charges that were not given to both Papadopoulos and to Manafort, because if they brought all of those charges on a federal level and then Trump pardons them, then the states would not be able to follow up due to double jeopardy. So is it smart on the part of Mueller not to bring those additional charges like tax fraud that he could have brought that can be then prosecuted through the state of New York in case he's fired?
Yeah, and that's very, very intricate way of looking at it. And I see it does have merit. But I'm going to give you something that's so simple. You have something that's very complex. I'm going to give you something simple from my standpoint. And that is, one can only be pardoned after they've been convicted. So Another part of this is just drag it out because Trump is not going to stay in office long enough for these people to actually be convicted and then sentenced to have the sentence then overturned in part.
That's probably the most interesting thing, because we see right now there's such a rush on the right from the Republicans. They're doing everything they can to try and to delegitimize Mueller and this entire investigation. I think I read the other day, and I don't remember the Republican congressman who did it, but there's a Republican congressman who was trying to introduce a law, he's basically trying to just to get the whole Mueller investigation to go away. He's trying to basically take away his power as a special prosecutor.
Well, yes, and unfortunately, because these unscrupulous hypocrites who are in Congress, and they could be of either party, I really don't care, unscrupulous hypocrites that they are, who only want what the Trump administration can give them. They don't care about this democracy being ripped to shreds domestically or internationally. They don't care that what this man represents in the White House is an anathema to what the framers were talking about. This is the reason why we have an electoral college. The electoral college did just the opposite of what it was created to do. It was created so that the thought was that the masses would come up following the charismatic politicians and following their emotions and the charisma of this person, vote without thinking, but only with their emotions. So therefore, there was supposed to be this level-headed group called, the Electoral College, who would look at the popular vote and decide whether or not that should be the reasoned candidate who should be president of the United States. Because there is no Electoral College for any other group.
Right.
Only for any other candidate. It's only for the president of the United States. And so just the opposite happened here, where we had the Electoral College pick somebody based on this charismatic sense that he could come in and do these things and did not mind the shame of doing shameful things. And so we have people who are in Congress who are benefiting from a shameless politician, a shameless individual who was giving them the political things they need, the political goodies they need. And they don't care what he destroys in the process as long as he brings home the bacon for their constituents.
And that's an important distinction that you're making, because ultimately a lot of what goes on in this country, we have certain standards and we have certain mores that we just adhere to, and they're almost unspoken, or it goes without saying that as the president, that there's a minimum standard of behavioral expectation that we should have as the American people, and Donald Trump has eviscerated that in 10 months.
Well, he came in eviscerating it. Any politician who can actually say on the political road that he could shoot somebody and still keep his vote doesn't care about maintaining a sense of the high road or even a sense of moral decency. And the fact that these evangelicals became spiritual hypocrites by deciding they're going to side with the bully and be there in the political power. They don't care. They want to be there in the room with the one with the political power, even if it goes against everything that they so-called preach on Sundays. And there's no reason why people have, fallen away from Christian beliefs. If these people are the ring bearers for Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity, it's a shame that they're supporting someone who is so morally crippled at this time. And
that's the biggest, I think, and we've had this conversation before on this show. That's what's so frightening, is that because Trump tried, I think he repealed the Johnson rule about churches and them losing their 501(c) status if they talk about politics, and the way that people's brains are wired when they're fundamentalist in their religion. If their pastor gets up on Sunday and says you have to vote for Trump, and then they are allowed to do that, and they will be unabashed about saying that, it does a disservice to not only those people but the American people at large. I would submit, though, that in the coming election in 2020, that there's going to be a landslide against him, against Trump, if he decides to run a second time, which there are a lot of people who have speculated that he won't even do that.
Well, here's my concern. People need to go out and vote no matter what. I've met some very intelligent, hardworking people who said they didn't vote for anybody in this past presidential election. I've met people who said that what's the use of voting? Well, if you didn't know why you needed to vote, I guess now you do.
Right.
Because, for Hillary Clinton to have won, she needed a landslide. I still criticize the Hillary Clinton campaign, because she should have brought Bernie Sanders on as her running mate. And so all of this ridiculousness of people who are in politics, if you're in politics, it's a dirty game, and you know it going in. So they should have known what was required, which was to bring in those Bernie people. Just the same way I'm sure that John Kennedy didn't want to bring in Johnson, but he knew Johnson brought in the South and brought in the folks. If you're going to be in bed in politics and you know who you're going to be in bed with, but I'm going to put this out here, and I know this is a bad way to put it. When Donald Trump and the rest of them got in bed together, and now they're going to get up, scratch it. And I hate to put it that way, but they all got in bed with him, and now they're going to get up, burn it. So
that's a perfect metaphor. That's a perfect metaphor,
right? Attorney Marshall, time is against us, so there's something I'd like to ask you that I cannot let you leave without posing this question to you. But again, I do a lot of reading. I came across another piece. This one was written by David Roberts at Vox. It's called "America is Facing an Epistemic Crisis." And he poses generally, what happens if Mueller finds out all of this information about Trump and it's true, and there's collusion and there's obstruction of justice, and we give a collective to it. So let me show you how he outlines this. Just stick with me for a moment. Say Mueller reveals hard proof that the Trump campaign knowingly colluded with Russia, strategically using leaked emails to hurt Clinton's campaign. Say the president, backed by the Wall Street Journal editorial page, Fox News, Breitbart, most of the U.S. cabinet, half of the panelists on CNN, most of the radio talk shows in the country, and an enormous network of Russian-paid hackers and volunteer, he says, shit posters working through social media, rejects the evidence. So he has all those entities rejecting the evidence. They might say Mueller is compromised. It's a Hillary deep plot state. There's nothing wrong with colluding with Russia in this particular way. Dems did it first. All of the above, whatever. Say the entire right-wing media machine kicks to life and dismisses the whole thing as a scam, and conservatives believe them. The conservative base remains committed to Trump. Politicians remain scared to cross the base, and the U.S. politics remain stuck in partisan paralysis, unable to act on what Mueller discovers. In short, what if Mueller proves the case and it's not enough? What if there is no evidentiary standard that could overcome the influence of right-wing media? In other words, what if Trump can go out in the middle of Fifth Avenue, shoot somebody, and it doesn't matter? What if that's true?
Here's where protest comes in. This is really what was leading up to Richard Nixon. The conservatives backed Richard Nixon until those tapes were disclosed. They had to actually hear him speaking on those tapes. How did they get the tapes? From the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court, now that we know that they've already, fixed the court in many ways by adding Gorsuch, the idea is the smoking gun, as we've seen in some of the shooting cases, is required. But even if no one pays attention as far as the law goes and their established processes, that's where protest comes in. People must take to the streets. People must stay in the streets. People must live in the streets. Without justice, there can be no peace. And so, yes, we can say, oh, such, that's terrible. The conservatives will say, we're not going to pay attention. They can't make money in chaos. And that's what the basis of a capitalist system we need to always remember. We have the power of chaos. And if we create chaos, and especially extended chaos, there will be change. They will address this issue.
That is amazing. As we bring this to a close, that ultimately what you said is that our power to hold our politicians accountable really comes down to a function of disrupting commerce.
Yes. In a capitalist country, that is power.
And in so doing, we're actually by citizens doing that, the business community is going to then hold the politicians accountable, because they're saying, hey, you got to get this under control because you're disrupting my money. Ultimately,
yes.
That's amazing. We really, really appreciate you, Attorney Gloria Brown Marshall, speaking to us today. I really enjoyed this conversation. We could talk forever. Please tell our listeners and the people who are watching how they can find you and follow you. Like I said, I know you're a regular on CNN, but tell them, just so the next time they catch you, they can say, "Oh yeah, we saw her or heard her on Humanity in the Headlines." Where can they follow you?
Well, they can follow me on Twitter, G Brown Marshall, Brown with an E, Marshall with 2 L's, and they can support my organization, the Law and Policy Group. the Law and Policy Group. So we're on Facebook, the Law and Policy Group. And just know that I'm out here trying to make a difference in the world. You can read my book, The Voting Rights War. Read my book, and it talks about protest and what we've been able to do with it in order to maintain the right to vote.
Attorney Gloria Brown Marshall, we thank you for joining us today on Humanity in the Headlines, and we will definitely be reaching out to you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. There you have it.
That's it.
There you have it. It is frightening. You know what? I'll say this, and I can say it's obviously hindsight is 2020. But when I think back to the hyperbole and how much we were screaming and yelling under George W. Bush, George W. Bush was a I can say
saint,
a good president,
right?
Compared to what we have today.
I've always said no one is happy about the Trump presidency than George W. Bush, because George W. Bush was known for two things. He was known for being a racist president and a dumb president. And Donald Trump has snatched both of those mantles
right.
and just ran with it.
Right.
Right. Oh my goodness. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will speak with none other than Jane Elliott. Thanks for watching Humanity in the Headlines. We are back on Humanity in the Headlines. This is your host, Atiba Buchanan, joined by my main man, my co-host, Mr. David Seaton. Dave, we've got to talk about this. So I was really taken aback this week by General Kelly's comments. You know, when he first became the, what is his position again? He's the
chief of staff.
Chief of staff, thank you. When he became chief of staff, a lot of people felt he was going to be the stabilizer, the centrist, someone to bring order in a land of chaos. And he's done that to some degree. But as we've seen him speak in recent days, as it pertains to Congresswoman Wilson and his remarks, his inaccurate remarks about her that he was unwilling to apologize for, and now his comments concerning the framing of the Civil War and that it happened because there wasn't enough compromise. He called and his praising of General Robert E. Lee. We see now that he's more Trumpian than we thought. He and Trump are really more of two peas in a pod than initially suspected. But the way that I took his comments concerning the Civil War in particular, with him being a 4-star general, the first thing I thought was, how could he be so substantively wrong about the actual history, given that he should, if anything, he should know military history.
Right.
Given the fact that he's a 4-star general. And right. that caused me to ask the broader question, if he can be so substantively wrong because of what he's taught, then what chance does the average American have? And then what role does education play in perpetuating racism and continuing white supremacy? And then I thought, the best person in the world to ask in the world is Jane Elliott. She has been kind enough to join us today. Let me tell you, listeners, a little bit about her. Jane Elliott is an American former 3rd grade school teacher, anti-racism activist, and educator, as well as feminist and an LGBT activist. She is known for her blue eyes, brown eyes exercise. She first conducted her famous exercise for her class the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. This is a woman who was an Emmy and Peabody Award winner. We don't have the time to tell you how many awards she's won, but we do have time. But we do have time to speak with her today, and I'm so grateful that she is here. Miss Elliott, how are you today? Mrs. Elliott, how are you?
Well, I'm fine, but all that stuff is very nice. But if you ask any black person on the street, they know more about racism in this country than I do.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But we still thank you for your perspective.
More since breakfast than I'll ever learn about racism.
Wow. You
know that, I know that, and they know that. They tolerate me because at least I'm saying things that most white folks don't dare say because, number one, they aren't old. Nobody's going to kill an old white woman. That would not look good.
Right.
And when I go on a college campus, there are always those three little fraternity boys in about the third row, and they're talking while I am. And I finally stop and say, look, fellas, I know what you're talking about. You want to see me dead because I'm trying to reduce the level of racism in this country. Now, think about this. If you kill me because of what I'm trying to do, you might make a martyr out of me, and then you might have to spend the rest of your lives celebrating Jane Elliot Day once a year. Do you want to do that? And then they all, no, and they make a cross, out of their first fingers and hold them up, and I say, thanks, now keep me alive on your campus.
Wow.
And every person in that room, whatever you are one of my cousins, because we are all members of the same race.
Right.
And it's time for us to stop talking about racism and start talking about colorism and trying to keep this country. What we're trying to do with this fool in the White House is continue to have a pigmentocracy in this country, a place where people are treated fairly or unfairly based on the color of their skin. And skin color is not the problem. When somebody says, I don't like that person because of the color of their skin, or when somebody says, that person doesn't like me because of the color of my skin, you need to realize that what's really wrong is they don't like the color of your skin because they are ignorant. They are ignorant about skin color, its cause, its effect, where it came from, and where we all came from.
This so glad.
This is not about color. This is about skin color. This is about the ignorance of judging people on the basis of the amount of pigmentation in their skin. It is as ignorant as anything could possibly be, and we've been doing it in this country for, 400 years?
Absolutely. So here's a question I have, because you led right to it. When you use the word ignorant as profoundly and as powerfully as you do, the biggest combatant against ignorance is education, and that's why we're here today. So let's talk a bit about how our education system here in the United States continues to perpetuate racism. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, number one, in this country, we don't have education. We call it education, but what it is indoctrination. It takes us 13 years to indoctrinate a student to the myth of white superiority. And that's what education is about in this country. It is about perpetuating the idea that there are 4 or 5 different races, and obviously the best race is white. It's a lie. It's time to stop telling the lie. And the really bothersome thing is, several years ago, somebody did a study, and I don't remember who it was or what the name of the study was, but they did a study to find out whether racism, somebody's trying to call me ignore it, whether education, higher you go in education, the less bigoted you become. What they discovered is, more years you spend in school, the more bigoted you become, because the more you are reinforced in the stuff that you learn grades K through 12. Now think about that. We are still celebrating Columbus Day in this country, even though it's a lie. We are still, our president stops talking to the group and he says, God bless you and God bless America. Well, at the same time, in that same speech, he has said, we're going to build a wall to keep those brown-skinned people out of here. Those brown-skinned people south of the border are Americans. It hasn't occurred to this fool yet that everybody from the northernmost tip of Canada to the southernmost tip of South America is in the Americas.
Right.
They're all Americans. You can't you don't dare put up a wall between the United States and Mexico because you're keeping out Americans. See, people don't think very deeply in this country because we are encouraged not to think. It's like, I think the place was Julius Caesar, in which somebody says, that man is dangerous, he thinks too much. Nobody ever says that about Donosaurus T. Rump, because I don't think he thinks at all. Thought comes into his ear and comes out his mouth. There's no thought involved in what he says. It's really frightening.
And this is David again. I'm just blown away by your candor. It's so refreshing.
You mean my tactlessness? I know what you're saying. That's all right.
Not at all. I definitely meant candor. But I'm thinking about when you just mentioned that we still celebrate Christopher Columbus Day. And I was watching something. There's this little show on Fox News called Water's World, where he was going out and talking to people about Columbus Day. And he asked some people, what did Columbus discover? And people said, oh, he discovered America. And then his very next question was, who was here to help him when he got here? And the correct answer was the Indians. And just the contradiction right there.
Cognitive dissonance.
The cognitive dissonance that you say that you discovered something, but there were people there when you got there. That right there.
That you can't discover a place where people are already living because they discovered it before you got there.
Exactly.
Thor knew what he was talking about.
But that goes to my point when you're talking about education and how really K through 12 education in this country is indoctrination, and that it highlights or emphasizes the contributions, and I say that in air quotes, of European Americans, and then minimizes or dismisses any contribution from any other group of people. It's really more insidious than just indoctrination when you can ask two consecutive questions about the discovery of this country that contradict themselves and still tell yourself that you should have some sort of pride as a European American because your race, in air quotes again, discovered America.
Yes, we discovered America. People who were already living here were waiting to live until we got here to discover them and to tell them the proper way to worship. Wasn't it kind of them to wait till we got here? The whole thing is so utterly, totally, and entirely ridiculous that students at the college level who are still convinced that people like Steve King from Western Iowa, a member of the House of Representatives, says no colored people have ever contributed anything to civilization. And nobody came down on him and took him apart.
Right.
They let it stand.
Right.
That's what I'm waiting for, and I want to be there when this happens.
And that was I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, let me ask you, who was our first black president?
I forget his name, but he was before George Washington.
Right.
Who was our first black president?
It was John Hanson.
Who was our first black president?
John Hanson.
Well, good guess. Abraham Lincoln.
I have read that before.
Yeah, Abraham Lincoln was part black, part white, and part Cherokee Indian. He was a Melungeon. Now, when the Republicans, and some of my best friends are Republican. I want you to know that. I don't dislike Republicans.
Right.
But some of my best friends have made mistakes. They are good Republicans, but they've made some mistakes. I want to be there when the Republicans get together and cheer because they are the Republicans, they are the party of Lincoln, and somebody says to him, and of course you know that he was Melungeon, they'll say, brilliant, right? And they'll say, yeah, that means he was part black, part white, and part Native American. I'll bet they'll change the name of their party.
And for you, and again, I've read that before. I've never really delved into it that deeply, but for you to say that, I mean, I would assume that everyone who is listening and everyone who is watching, their visceral response is probably not to believe that. It's to say, I've seen pictures of Abraham Lincoln. He wasn't black, he was white. But what does...
You look at pictures of Abraham Lincoln very carefully, and you look at the length of his arms and his legs, and you look at the shape of his face, and you look at the texture of his hair, and that is not a German.
Right. But I guess my larger point is, how did we come to a place where it is 2017 and it is not a commonly known fact that our 16th president, who was the president during the Civil War and responsible for ultimately the slavery being made illegal, how is it not a commonly known fact that president is part African American?
I'll answer your question. Here's the way we did that, and here's the way we'll continue to do it. When I was a sophomore in college, a teacher trainee, our social studies instructor said, when you get into the classroom, do not teach in opposition to the local mores. The people who are paying your wages through their taxes have the right to have their children learn what they want them to learn. So all you have to do is have instructors, because these are not educators. I'm an educator. The word educator comes from the root dux, which means lead. the prefix E, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who leads people, who is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. That is not what we get paid to do and sit in schools in the United States of America. What we get paid to do is perpetuate the status quo. Do not teach in opposition to the local mores. And I told that to somebody who was writing an article for a magazine, and he spelled mores, M-O-R-A-Y-S, which is the name for an eel. He did not recognize the word mores. He has a PhD. That worries me.
Right. But again, I guess to hear you say these things, ultimately is the purpose or the perpetuation of racism and the perpetuation of white supremacy, is it really just a power grab and a way to concentrate wealth to a certain group of people, or is it that people who are Caucasians and who espouse white supremacy, they truly believe in the superiority of their race, or does that distinction not even important?
They believe it. And you can be, I know this has happened, I see this happen. You can be the most dissolute, you can be a white man lying in the gutter. And when somebody comes along and says, can I help you up? Then they'll say, well, at least I'm white.
Right.
Doesn't matter how little you've accomplished in your life, as long as you've accomplished being white. That's all that matters. I will never forget, and I wish I could do this with your group. You have a tall white male there and a black female.
Do we have that here?
Yeah.
No.
You don't? Okay, well, let me tell you what happened. I was asked to address a group of college instructors and department heads and a couple of people, in the administrative department of a college a month ago. And they said, well, I think we should discuss similarities. Similarities are more important than differences. Under the skin, we're all the same. And I'm standing up there coming unglued thinking, my God, how can you be this dumb in 2017? I said, all right, let's talk about differences. Let me show you something. And I had already picked out a tall white male and a tall black female, and I'd asked them, and I didn't do anything about them. And I asked them to stand beside me, the man on my left and the woman on my right. And I said to the group, now, you see any differences here? Well, of course, they all said height because I'd set them up.
Right.
There's no way they were going to do anything but what I expected them to, because I know how to do this. I said to this tall white male, is your height important to you? He said, not really. I said, would you rather be your height or mine? He said, well, mine. I said, then let's get to some honesty here, shall we? Is your height important to you? Yes. Did you earn it? No. Is it a physical characteristic over which you have no control? Yes. Do you have power because of your height? Well, yeah. I said, thank you very much. Asked the black female the same questions. Got the same answers, except that when I said, does your height give you power? She said, well, there's some other issues that keep me from having power.
Right.
So I said, you see the other differences. So they saw gender. And we went through the thing with gender. The male has power because of his gender. Her gender doesn't give her power. So then they said age. His age gives him power. Hers doesn't, because even though they're the same age, there's another difference that nobody wanted to say. And I do this several times a month. It's ridiculous. I said, you see any other differences here? Finally, somebody said color, which is a step in the right direction, because usually they say race.
Right.
I thought that was really good that they said color. I think we're making progress here. I said, do you mean skin color or hair color? Skin color. So I asked the white guy, is your skin color important to you? He said, I never have to think about it. I never think about that.
Right.
And you could hear an audible gasp by the black people, because how wonderful that you never have to think about it. I said, did you earn it? No. Would you change it if you could? Well, no. Does your skin color give you power? Yeah, I guess it does. Ask the black woman the same question. Obviously, her answers were totally different.
Right.
So then I said to this guy, are you a free man? Are you free to go and be and do and say whatever you want to, as long as you stay within the confines of the law? I said, yeah, I'm a free man. I said to the black woman, sometimes does it take courage for you to get out of bed in the morning? And she didn't say anything for a few seconds, and then she said, I'll never forget this as long as I live. She said, I'm going to say something out loud that I have never told anyone before, and I haven't done it because I'm ashamed. She said, I have 2 daughters. When I was pregnant, I prayed that I wouldn't have a son. And I said, and that's because, she said, I knew what I would have to watch him go through, and I didn't want to go through what I would go through when I lost him.
Right.
And by then, there was one tear running down the left side of that beautiful black shining face. But that room, you could have heard a feather fall. The only sound you heard were people sniffling, and the white guy beside me was sniffling. And
Wow.
I said, now, people, she just taught you something more in a few minutes than I could teach you in a lifetime.
Wow. Wow.
This woman isn't free.
And I can even
Man,
hear
free.
in your retelling the story that you still have an emotional tie to this.
It makes me tremble to think of the ugliness of a society that is so ignorant about skin color that they will force a brilliant black woman to pray that she doesn't have what every white woman who is pregnant wants, is a son to carry on the family name. It is insane, people. And I said to those folks, all right, people, here's the way it is. The next time you sing the Star-Spangled Banner and put your hand over your heart and face the flag, when you come to the last words, oh, say, is that Star-Spangled Banner yet waved, or the land of the free, and I pointed at the white man, and the home of the brave, and I pointed at the black woman. Now, I know that some of you are thinking, my dad's brave. There are lots of brave men and women, white people in this country, but they choose to be brave. That black woman has no choice. She has to be brave in order to survive on a daily basis in the United States of America. And right now, in this country, we have thousands of young black males who are suffering from PTSD, who have never been in the military. And it isn't post-traumatic stress that they're suffering from, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's present traumatic stress disorder. Because if you can be killed because you're 12 or 10 years old and you're walking through a park with something that an officer thinks might be a gun, you're in a war zone.
Right. Right. So here's the question.
We white folks don't have to think about those things. And we don't want to think about those things. And we don't want to admit that those things are happening. And they are every day, 24/7 in this country. And we are in worse shape now because we had 8 years of a black man in the White House. And I remember when Richard Nixon said to a group of reporters, I'm trying to save the White House for you white people.
You know, as I'm listening to you, and I'm listening to you say that, and this is David again, and I'm just the power of your presentation is so great. But we've had this conversation before, so specifically about police, and I am of the belief that we're past the point of protesting and asking to be treated fairly or asking to be treated with equity. I believe that we are at the point, like you said, we're in a war zone, and that minorities have to treat it as such, and as such, we have to protect ourselves by any means necessary. Do you think I'm going too far?
No. I don't think you're going far enough. But are you a person of color other than the white color group?
I am.
Yeah. All right. Now let me tell you what's going to happen. And here's the way white folks are really scared right now. That many of them are scared to death. Literally, it's killing them because they know that within 30 years, white people will have lost their numerical majority in the United States of America. And they are scared to death. And I get this question every time I give a speech. Somebody says to me, well, and they say it out loud in front of an audience, if those people get power, aren't they going to want to treat us the way we've treated them? Which says that person who asked that question knows how she treats those people.
Right.
And she's scared to death that it's going to happen to her. And I say to her, look, fool, because anybody who asks that question publicly is a fool. If you want to be treated better in the future than you have treated people in the past, change the way you treat them in the present.
Right.
Because what we do in the present constructs the future. White folks, you better get you're suffering from cranial anal insertion. You better get over it. And you better get over it pretty soon. Because in the future, the people who are running this show aren't going to look like this little old white grandmother. They are going to be people of other color groups. If you think I'm lying about that, and if you think there isn't a lot of fear about that, get the book, The Birth Dearth, B-I-R-T-H, B-E-A-R-T-H, by Ben Wattenberg, W-A-T-T-E-N-B-U-R-G, and read it. Get it as fast as you can. You'll have a hard time getting it because it speaks the truth. It tells you what this is all about, and the people who are running this show don't want you to know this. I think that book is up to $180. For a while, they were charging $300 for it. But if you contact the Tattered Cover Bookstore in Denver, Colorado, they can probably get you a copy of that book because they get strange titles. And this is a strange title. But in this book, the first paragraph says, the major problem, words to this effect, the major problem confronting the United States today is there are too few white people being born in this country today. If we do not fix this and fix it soon, white people will be in a numerical minority, and this will no longer be a white man's land. That's what he says in the book. So I thought, well, I've got to read this. I can't stop now. He says there are 3 things we can do to solve this problem. Number 1, we could pay women to have babies as they have been doing in Western European nations for years. Then he says, and these are his words, not mine, unfortunately, we would have to pay women of all colors to have babies, so we don't want to do that. Does that sound like racism to you? Number 2, he says, the second thing we could do is allow more legal immigrants into this country every year. Then he says, unfortunately, the majority of those people wanting to come to this country today are people of color, so we don't want to do that. Build a wall, because brown people reproduce too rapidly, which is what Donald Trump says. This man, Ben Wattenberg, was a member of the American Enterprise Institute and gave advice to presidents of the United States. He wrote this book in 1987. We're talking 30 years ago. Think about that. Then he says the third thing we could do is remember that 60% of the fetuses that are aborted every year are white. If we could stop those abortions, we could stop what is happening to the decrease in the number of whites in the United States of America. Now, people, think about the right to life movement. There's no right to life movement. It's a right to white life movement.
Right.
I made those remarks at 60% of the fetuses are white in 1987. I made those remarks at a college not too long ago, about 6 weeks ago. There were 2 little boys, not little boys, they're young men, but and they were wearing the red hats that said "Make America Great Again," which really means "Make America Hate Again," because the people who are wearing them want to go back to the 50s. I made those remarks. These 2 boys are sitting there arguing with the people around them. And finally, I said, "What are you boys upset about something?" "Yeah, you got your statistics wrong." I said, "What are the statistics that you know?" He said, "Well, the statistics just came out." I said, "Yeah, and what are they?" 39% of the fetuses that are aborted are white. 61% of them are other colors. I said, "You just made my point." And he did, because the percentage of fetuses that are white have gone down since 1987 from 60% to 39%. Now, is that because more white women are having babies, or is it because they are not allowed not to have a baby?
Right.
I think you women in that group need to realize that I talked to a woman, last summer, whose grandmother was German and was in Germany during the Holocaust. And she had a really good friend, they were young women, 14, 16 years old, 16 to 18 years old. And she said she prayed that she wouldn't have to go into the rape room. And she didn't have to go because she wasn't Aryan enough. But her friend had to go into the rape room and had to be impregnated, and then after the baby was born, a couple months later, she had to go back to the rape room. Does that bother you at all? And does the attempt to prevent a woman from having control of her own body in the United States of America bother you at all? If you think for 1 minute that protesting abortion, the people who are protesting abortion, are all good Christians, you need to take another look. Because while the rate of abortion among white women has dropped, the rate of abortion among women of color has increased. And I don't think that's an accident. I wish I thought it was an accident, but I don't think it is. I think it's part of the ridiculous plan by people who really do think that the less melanin you have in your skin, the more intelligent you are and the more valuable as a human being you are. Nothing could be farther from the truth. The next time you guys, I don't know how many of you ride a motorcycle, and I don't know how many of you drive a big truck, but the next time you come up to a stop sign and the light's red, you look up that stop sign and realize that your life is being controlled at that moment by an invention by a black man.
Right, right.
Let me ask you to do this, Mrs. Elliot, because time is against us. You and I had a conversation on the phone the other day, and you told me very succinctly what we could do to get rid of racism in 2 generations. Can you let my audience, let's give them a peek into the window of that conversation you shared with me the other day, and then we're going to end it there.
I don't remember what I said. You tell me what I said, and then I'll remember.
Well, absolutely. You told us we could get rid of racism in 2 generations by doing 2 things. I think the first was including the achievements of African Americans, or not just African Americans, but people of color.
Here's if I were teaching at the college level today.
Yes.
I would insist that every student in every class that I taught read the book The Myth of Race by Robert Wald Sussman. And I would insist that every college that has an education department would insist that every student in the education department who wanted to be a teacher go through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. I would insist that every college have on their faculty somebody who is trained to do that exercise, who has the gonads to do that exercise, and does it and changes the way people see themselves and their world. I would insist that every student in my class read They Came Before Columbus by Ivan Van Sertima. I would insist that every student in my class read Butler's Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. I would insist that, and right now, everybody in that room, take a really deep breath. Inhale mightily. Do it. Have they all done that, Mr. Professor? Did they inhale?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Now, everybody exhale. Voice gusto. Push it out.
Okay.
Now, inhale again.
Okay.
Now, folks, when you exhaled, you breathed out teeny tiny particles of yourself. Tiny particles of yourselves. And when you inhaled the cells of those around you. So that now, once you have done that, you can never say, I'm a pure white, because you aren't, because you just breathed in all those cells of all those people who are different from you around you. That's how we spread germs, people. And it's how we spread parts of ourselves. You can't possibly deny that you can't possibly support the myth of 4 or 5 different races after you have taken a breath around those who are different from yourself, because you have all become part of one another. You're all cousins. You're all part of the human race. There's only one race, and you're all part of it. I could ask you, would every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the white race please stand? Do it. Stand, white folks. Are they standing, Mr. Professor?
We don't have any Caucasian people in the room with us.
You don't have any white people there?
We do not.
All right, then will all the people who consider themselves members of the black race please stand?
They're all standing.
Now, are there any members of the brown race there?
No.
Any members of the yellow race there?
No.
How about the red race?
No.
Which doesn't exist. Now, will every person in that room who considers himself or herself a member of the human race please sit down?
Right.
Everybody's sitting.
Now, are they sitting?
Yes.
Right.
Well, what does that tell all of us?
One race.
It tells all of us that we're not only one race, we're one species. Now, people, get this into your heads. You can't cross a cat with a dog and get a cog or a dat. You got it? However, you can cross members of different color groups and reproduce beautiful mosaic people.
Right.
There are no multiracial people in this country or on the face of the earth. There are mosaic people and lots of them, because members of different color groups recognize one another as equally human and equally lovable. and equally desirable. So it's time to get over this idea that, oh, they can't mix colors. My father used to say, I'll never forget it, don't be bringing any pickaninnies into my house as grandchildren. And then my daughter married a Saudi Arabian. And she brought little Sophie back and laid her in my father's arms. And my father looked up at my daughter and my son-in-law, and he said, well, that's a pretty good cross.
Mm.
And then he said, it's the most beautiful child I ever saw.
Right.
He learned, but before that, he had seen the film that was made the second year I did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise in my class. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation filmed it. And they sent me a copy of the film. And I showed it to my father and my mother in the little hotel that they own in Riceville, Iowa. He watched that whole thing. And after it was over, my father, who was about 56 years old at that time, stood up, took his red handkerchief out of the back pocket of his bib overalls, and with tears in his eyes said, I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old.
Jane Elliot,
I wish somebody had taught my father that when he was 9 years old. I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old. I wish somebody had taught Donosaurus T. Rump that when he was 9 years old.
Jane Elliot, it is such a pleasure again to have you and to meet you and to have you and talk to you. We could have this conversation go on forever, but definitely this has been an illuminating conversation, I know, for everyone who is listening and everyone who is watching today. Please tell our listeners and our watchers how they can follow you, where they can find your information, so that they don't just have to wait for the next random Facebook post of one of your exercises from your teaching days.
Well, I'm not going to tell you where you can follow me because I get threatened with death all the time, so I don't tell people where I'm going to be unless it's the people that are going to be there. But you can find out more than you want to know by going on YouTube, because practically everything I've ever done is on YouTube. But if you watch it on YouTube, people, remember that you're only seeing a short little clip of what happens every time I do this exercise.
Right.
You can write to me at Elliot, ELLIOTT.BRI@gmail.com, and I'll answer your letters.
Well, we
but
thank
not
you.
If you're going to write to me and say the kinds of things that somebody called and told me the other day on the telephone, I won't answer those letters, but I will download them and put them in the next book I write. And that would help me if you would read the book I wrote, which is not a great book, but it's called A Collar in My Pocket, and it's a description of how white people of all ages behave when they are treated for a few minutes the way black people are treated for a lifetime in this country. You need to realize that the problem is not skin color, it's ignorance. And when you read that book, you'll read a whole lot about a whole lot of ignorant people. And realize, people of color, that when somebody says it's the color, it isn't, it's the ignorance. You can't change color, but you can change ignorance.
We're going to leave it right there, Mrs. Elliot. We thank you so much for being on today and again, giving our listeners such valuable information and even a call to action. Thank you so much for being on today. I wish we would have even dedicated the whole hour to you at this point, but we would hope that you would remain a friend of the show, and we'd love for you to come back.
You call me and I'll be there.
Thank you so much. That made my day to hear that.
Thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, Mrs. Elliot. Thank you so much.
You too. Bye now.
Everybody on Facebook, share the show today.
Absolutely.
You've got to share the show just for that conversation with Jane Elliot at the end. We thank Attorney Gloria Brown Marshall. This was a powerful show today.
Absolutely.
Definitely share the show today.
I know it was powerful because Earl didn't even wrap us up. We want to thank our producer, Breon Jones, definitely Mr. Earl Winfrey, and for his patience today and letting us get that show out today. This is one for the history books for Intellectual Radio and Humanity in the Headlines. We thank you for listening and watching. Join us again next week as we try to do it all over again. Have a blessed and safe weekend, everybody.